Every inhabited continent carries her African footprint somewhere in its bloodline. We uncover the women history left behind. Her story, our history, our legacy. This is Roots Unspoken.
Everything we know about one of the boldest religious movements Africa ever produced comes almost entirely from the men who were trying to destroy it. Antonianism lasted less than 2 years as an organized movement. It had no printing press, no cathedral of its own, no surviving scripture in its founder's hand, and it still forced the Catholic Church to formally investigate whether Christianity could survive without European priests standing in the middle of it. This is the theology Rome couldn't ignore and couldn't tolerate, and the reason a Congolese king ended up using his own executed prophets movement to save his kingdom. Real women, real artifacts, real history. This is Roots Unspoken. To understand why Antonianism was possible at all, you need the 2 centuries that came before it. Kongo wasn't a kingdom Europeans converted by force. Its king, Nzinga Nkulu, chose baptism in 1491, and his successors built one of the most genuinely Christianized states in Africa. Congolese priests, Congolese-run parishes, a Congolese bishop sent to Rome, but it was never a simple copy of European Catholicism. Congolese converts folded existing beliefs about ancestor spirits, mediums, and possession into Christian practice, creating something distinctly their own. By the time Kimpa Vita was born around 1684, an African-run, African-interpreted Christianity had already existed for 6 generations. She wasn't introducing something foreign. She was radicalizing something already homegrown. Strip away the politics, and Antonianism came down to 4 theological claims, each more radical than the last. First, geography. Kimpa Vita taught that Christ was born in Sao Salvador, which she renamed Bethlehem, and baptized at nearby Nzundi, renamed Nazareth. The Holy Land wasn't somewhere else. It was underfoot. Second, identity. Christ, the Virgin Mary, and St. Francis were Black and Congolese, not simply relatable to African believers, but actually historically African in her telling. Third, and most dangerous to institutional power, sacraments didn't matter. What mattered was intention. You didn't need a priest, confession, or the Mass to reach God. That single claim threatened to make the entire Catholic clerical structure in Congo obsolete overnight. Fourth, Saint Anthony himself was elevated to what missionaries recorded as a second God, not just an intercessor, but the central figure of a faith practiced directly, urgently, without European mediation. Any one of these would have drawn scrutiny. All 4 together, preached by a young woman claiming direct possession by a saint, made her impossible for the church to ignore. It's tempting to file Antonianism away as a fringe religious episode. It wasn't. Congo had been fracturing since the 1665 Battle of Mbwila. And by the early 1700s, rival princes had spent nearly 40 years fighting over a throne none of them could hold securely. Ordinary people were the ones paying for it, displaced, taxed by competing warlords, watching their capital set abandoned as a monument to failure. Kimpa Vita's message did something no army had. It gave people a reason to walk back into the ruins and rebuild, one that didn't require picking a side in the succession war. God wanted the capital repopulated. God wanted the kingdom whole. That framing let her build a following that cut across the noble factions tearing the country apart, which is exactly why it became a political threat, not just a religious one. Here's the irony historians still sit with. Almost everything we know about Kimpa Vita's actual teachings survives because 2 Italian Capuchin missionaries, Bernardo da Gallo and Lorenzo da Luca, documented her movement in obsessive detail, specifically so they could build a case against her. Their reports to Rome describe her preaching, her prayer, the Salve Antoniana, and her growing following with the kind of granular hostility that, centuries later, doubles as our best surviving record of what she actually said. Da Gallo was present at her trial. His account, written to justify her execution, is now one of the primary sources scholars use to reconstruct her theology with any precision. That's not a small irony. The men who wanted her erased ended up being the reason she wasn't. Kimpa Vita's execution in July 1706 did not end Antonianism, and for a while, many of her followers refused to believe she was even dead, insisting she would return. Leadership passed to a follower named Pedro Constantinino, and the movement spread beyond Sao Salvador into other Congo provinces, continuing to draw peasants disillusioned by the endless succession war. It took 3 more years for the political threat to be fully broken. In 1709, forces loyal to King Pedro IV retook Sao Salvador outright, and most of the noble adherents who had backed the movement renounced it and rejoined the official church. A survival calculation, as much as a change of heart. But here's the twist that makes this story more than a tragedy. Pedro IV, the king who authorized Kimpa Vita's execution, didn't discard the energy she'd unleashed. He used the same religious momentum, the hunger for a reunified, divinely sanctioned Congo, to consolidate his own reign and finally reestablish a functioning capital. The prophet was gone. Her project succeeded anyway. For most of the last 3 centuries, European and church histories filed Antonianism under a single word: heresy. Case closed, footnote to Congo's civil war. Modern historians read it differently. Antonianism is now widely treated as one of the earliest documented instances of an African-initiated reform of a globally imposed religion. A woman taking Christianity's own texts and turning them into an argument for African centrality without asking European clergy for permission first. That's a different kind of dangerous than simple heresy. It's a template. Kimpa Vita's core idea that God's attention and sainthood belong to Africans on African terms didn't stay buried with her. In 1921, more than 200 years later, a Kongolese prophet named Simon Kimbangu began preaching a message historians have directly linked back to hers, and he is widely regarded as her spiritual and political descendant. The church that grew from his movement, Kimbanguism, is now one of the largest African-initiated Christian denominations in the world, with millions of members across Central Africa, and the restoration of a unified, dignified Congo identity still sits at the center of its theology, the same idea Kimpa Vita died defending. Kimpa Vita built a theology out of a kingdom's grief, got burned alive for it at 22, and watched if you believe the stories that she stayed present in spirit, as the king who killed her finished what she started, and as her ideas resurfaced 200 years later to help found a church that still exists. That's not a footnote to a civil war. That's one of the most consequential religious minds Central Africa ever produced. And for 300 years, most of the world only knew her as a heretic in someone else's trial record. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. On the next episode, we leave Central Africa for the Nile. A one-eyed queen is about to make the Roman Empire do something it almost never did: negotiate.
Why shall we? Why shall I?